Dr. Wonkite. I'm already into the 420, damn it.
So what are you doing?
Nothing.
Nothing? Why not?
Trying to get on this Lifestyle Radio website.
Sounds like a cool website.
Yeah, it's alright. Oh, wait, I might have it.
You might have it.
You're listening to Lifestyle Radio.
The opinions expressed during this show are those of the individual participants and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of their associated organizations or Lifestyle Radio.
You know I blame it on industry. I blame it on my own hypocrisy. Miseducation and politicians. No one's willing to step up and speak.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Pace Radio Show. We are live, and we are here at 420radio.ca, as well as from the front window at Canada Days in downtown Campbellford. I'm your host, Al Graham. Tonight, my joint host is the always busy Kim Cooper, who has invited a special guest who has been dealing cannabis law issues for many years and is presently fighting for patients' access and dispensaries. But first, Kim and I are going to have a really short talk, aren't we, Kim?
Yeah, it's going to be real quick tonight. We're going to do our normal thing that we usually do at the start of the show. We're going to do it at the end of the show this time because our special guest, Mr. Robert W.E, has to leave us right at 9 o'clock. So we're going to push everything sort of backwards tonight to make sure we get the maximum time with Rob.
Exactly. That's the goal here, is spend as much time talking with him while we can, and we can shoot the crap afterwards.
That's it, for sure. So let's get right at it.
All right. Okay. Well, at the time, I'd like to introduce our guest, who has been dealing with cannabis laws for many years, is presently fighting for patient access, dispensaries, all that stuff. We'd like to welcome lawyer Robert W.E to the Pace Radio Show. Hello, Robert. How are you?
Very well. How are you? Thank you, Kim and Al, for having me.
Hey, we appreciate you taking some time out of your day and spending with us to answer our questions, as well as probably a few of our listeners' questions.
Well, it's an absolute pleasure. So, let's happy to get down to it.
Okay, Kim, I'm going to let you get started with the questions and all that terrific stuff you do at the beginning of the show, and I'll jump in as we go along.
Sounds good, Al. Thanks so much. Thank you so much for joining us and taking the time out. As Al said, I know you're very, very busy, Rob. I really appreciate you giving our listenership some time tonight. For anybody out there that is unaware, Rob is a lawyer. He's out in BC, and he represents a lot of advocacy that's happening out in BC as well as globally. Rob, I've followed you for a very long time. I met you, and we had a chance to spend the weekend together during the Mom Cup in 2017. Was a spectacular weekend for sure. We went out to dinner a couple of times as a group, a whole bunch of us there, and I got to know you a little bit and know more about what you're doing down there. I've followed you ever since then and kept track of what you do. Man, you are all over the map. You go to so many different events, festivals, outings, conferences, both as a speaker and a spectator. You really keep your pulse on the situation that's happening with legalization on a global scale. In Canada, right here at home, most recently, you were involved in a constitutional challenge that was brought forth to the government on behalf of dispensary owners for patients and patient access and patient rights. Can you tell us a bit about that, Rob?
Certainly. Now, before I get into it, can you hear me all right, all the way on the West Coast here?
You're coming through loud and clear, hon.
So let's just see if we can start at the beginning. You'll recall that Vancouver was the first municipality in Canada to pass bylaws and regulations permitting and essentially facilitating the sale and licensing of cannabis. That was all great in theory because at the time there were over 100 plus dispensaries operating in the city of Vancouver. Against that backdrop, we've had the litany of litigation beginning with R.V. Parker, of course, the epileptic case of the gentleman with epilepsy who was faced with the decision of, do I break the law and access my medicine, or do I follow the law and go without it? And that's really where we're still at, is that there was a line drawn in the sand with respect to the government at the federal level to come up with a medical program to meet the reasonable needs of medical patients in that instance. So we went through the history of the Section 56er, MMAR, MMPR to ACMPR, and now the Cannabis Act, where under none of that does it provide for storefront retail and access to medical cannabis.
Right. Now that really came to a head once legalization came to forefront and non-medicinal consumers have that access.
That's correct. And the problem is that you have the medical system under the Federal Health Canada government, which is how we access as Canadians our medicines. For anything else, we get essentially through a pharmacy or a establishment that is licensed to provide that medicine. And so really what's happened is you have the backdrop of 20 years of dispensaries providing community access to cannabis in a gray area, but no provision for that rich tradition and history of patient access under the law. And so that's where we had three levels of government collide in the test case, whereby the city of Vancouver as a municipality, we argued that it was illegal for them in the first place to be doing what they're doing. Why? Because the regulation of controlled substances falls within the permit of the federal government. In any event, authority and power of municipalities flows from provincial legislation, and the provincial government did not give Vancouver or Victoria permission to do this. In short, they went rogue. They did so, however, just let me confirm that against this backdrop of that it looked like after Allard, there was going to be probably some form of dispensary regulation, but yet there hasn't been. And so with a municipality actively licensing cannabis and enforcing against cannabis, as well as designing a licensing system where only 11 of the 100 of them meet the strict criteria of the land use and zoning, to which we're at 3 years later, and there's only been 19 licenses issued. And out of even those 19 and the 100% of other illegal stores that are operating, the supply of cannabis that they have or accessing and distributing through their system is not from a licensed source. And that problem and dichotomy now is even more in focus post October 17th legalization, because of all the effort has been made by these licensed producers, right? And there's no rules that say they have to set aside anything for medical patients, but they've gone where the dollar is. And clearly, if they can fetch more money for their cannabis under a rec model, and the government can charge more excise tax, or they can import it to the EU, Australia, or whoever who will pay twice to three, however much, of course they're going to go for that. Where does that leave medical patients? Well, we're right back to where we were with RV Parker, whereby licensed medical patients now under the ACMPR and Cannabis Act, who are licensed with an LP, right, have not been able to access their cannabis. In fact, I got an affidavit sworn today from a patient on the island who today was unable to get his medicine. And he's having to resort to the black market, unlicensed and marginalized dispensaries who are trying to go through a licensing process designed to grind and exclude them.
Right. Right. And we're right back to square one, as you said. I mean, this entire issue, the entire envelope for patient rights, patient access, this has all been pushed by patients. I mean, it's in the term, patient rights, patient access. This whole thing it started by a push for patients to have legal means to have our medicine and a legal way to grow it without fear of persecution from law enforcement. And it evolved into the rec market from there. But yet we are the ones being marginalized here in the end and forgotten about.
Let me give you an example to highlight that, if I may, just on the point. You'll notice when Vancouver when they introduced the licensing scheme in about June 2015, it was called the MMRU, Medical Marijuana Retail Use.
Yeah.
Okay. And that, again, they went out on that limb. I explained this to a judge today on a Victoria case that the city of Vancouver went out on a limb to justify their actions in the name of who? Medical and patient access. And then when the new laws finally came down, the Cannabis Act at the federal level, and then at the provincial level in BC, the Cannabis Distribution Act, along with the Cannabis Control and Licensing Act of British Columbia, essentially made it very clear that the only way that you can legally sell cannabis, let alone, LP cannabis, is through a government retail system, which now has unfortunately created an us versus them dichotomy when it never had to be that way. But the nice thing is, I believe, and, you can talk to Jack Lloyd, John Conroy, and Dean Davison and the other lawyers involved with the test case, that we've gone to the high ground first with the charter. And so that, to me, tells us that any dispensary or operation that's operating now post-legalization that requires patient access or doctor recommendation, some form of medical verification that's, again, providing access, my argument would be that even if the police or government enforcement or bylaw come in, you, especially at this time with a shortage that's on parallel with a health crisis, would probably have the protection of the charter because the government is failing to deliver.
That's right. If we can't get it anywhere else, what choice do we have but to get it where it's being supplied from? And that is the gray market that they say we're not supposed to have this. They're asking for proof of purchases and what did the excise tax stamp look like? Do you have the receipt? All of these kind of things to prove that your cannabis is actually legal product.
I think it's important to also note that if you do get pulled over or on the street and you have cannabis on you, it's important to know your rights. Unless you are breaking the law or are suspected of breaking the law, and that's a lot harder to determine probable cause in a post-legalization world, again, you really just need to ask the officer, am I under arrest? He says no, then am I free to go? At that point, then leave, right? There's no point talking to them about where you bought the cannabis or where did you get this and is this LP weed or so on, because you could be incriminating yourself.
Well, there you go. You've heard it from a lawyer. If you get stopped and asked about your purchases of cannabis, you're not basically obligated to tell them anything.
Unless you're under arrest, and then at that point, there has to be reasonable grounds. But if you're just walking down the street having a vape or, I would say, smoking medical cannabis or anything, I mean, it's happened in the past with me whereby, if you are licensed under the legal system, whether or not you access it from it is another thing. But, still, you're able to tell the officer, I'm a medical patient. Go ahead, call Health Canada. Right? Yeah. And if your name's on a database, that is more probable than likely that you're a legitimate medical patient than the presumption of someone without that. At that point, they'll let you go. But again, it's this negligence that we're seeing. And there was a story that even my mom forwarded it to me today involving some cannabis investor who has now a lifetime ban from the United States. Well, the guy's an idiot. I mean, with all due respect, I've been saying for months and years, when you're dealing with border officials, again, they're going to ask you very simple preliminary questions, and less is more. And
you
really, Yeah.
He was going to the expo or something down there.
Yeah, they asked him where he was going, and he said he was going to a cannabis expo.
But that's ridiculous. You're in Las Vegas. I said, I'm going to the Bellagio. I'm going to gamble and maybe see Celine Dion, right? And then they ask, when are you back? Friday. Even if they ask, conference, you can say business development. I mean, cannabis is the last word that you should use, but this guy went a step further. His leadoff question to your purpose of the visit to the United States wasn't Disneyland with the family. It was, I'm going down to look at a grow, because I'm involved in a marijuana business. And they're like, oh, really, sir? That sounds contrary to the essentially United States Immigration and Taxation Act or something like that, which then means you're going to secondary interrogation where they're now going to ask for your phone codes. They'll go to your Facebook. So really, less is more. Purpose of your visit to United States, personal.
They even recently announced that they wouldn't stop executives or investors or whatever if they're going down there for, like you say, to Disneyland. But if they say that they're going down there that's cannabis related, then just like this fella, you're done.
Yeah, I mean, somebody asked what are the benefits of joining Freemasonry, and well, I figured if you're traveling to the United States and you are going to, I don't know, conferences and expos or other endeavors, which, let's face it, there's a fundamental right to exist, or to attend, but that's different than getting into a fight with a customs officer who's just doing his job. But I mean, ultimately, you can give them a different, give them a story of what you're doing, but without getting into the detail.
That's right. You're not lying. You're just omitting some major details.
Well,
you don't have to tell them the exact purpose.
Unless you show up to the counter stinking of weed, wearing a Grateful Dead t-shirt for sake of stereotype, and I don't know, like a sensible BC hat or Weed 420 dispensary hat, right? That right away is going to be, what's the purpose of visit to United States? Based on that, it'll probably be, do you smoke or consume cannabis, right? How do you talk your way out of that? It's automatically a yes. Then they've got to then take you through that line of questioning, which, let's face it, a sensible change of clothes, a T-shirt, maybe some mouthwash, and washing your hands and understanding what it is about why you're going to the States. Ultimately, that's all they need to hear, right? Yeah. You go with the masonry point, I tried to make is, if you get an introduction from a lodge in the States and then they ask you at the border, purpose of the visit, you just say, well, I'm here to attend a lodge meeting. Here's my letter of introduction from the Grand Lodge of the state of Philadelphia or, Pennsylvania, etc.
Right.
There you go.
And that's better than saying I'm going down to a weed conference and look to buy and invest in an illegal marijuana grow under U.S. federal law. Have fun, boys.
You're kind of asking for trouble, right?
And some of the entrepreneurs are proud of it and they gloat. Like the other one made it so clear that he had to work for a nutriponics fertilizer company that grows marijuana. I mean, I look at it this way. Can you grow cucumbers and tomatoes with your product? If the answer is yes, then that's probably about as close to green as you want to get at the border.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, at this time.
Yeah. Okay, well, I want to circle back to what we were talking about at the very start, and that was the constitutional challenge. So you guys argued the case in BC there, and when do you hear back, and what is your feel on the situation?
Well, great questions in there, and I'll try to break it down. The what do we feel element is this. About a week after the trial, after things sort of settled down, I spoke to Jack Lloyd and I said, I have a feeling like that we won. And he kind of said the same thing, right, without jinxing it. But the way that we kind of come to that conclusion is if you look at a statutory injunction, and that's what the city of Vancouver brought against the 67 somewhat dispensaries, right? A statutory injunction essentially is an instrument of last resort whereby the court should rule in favor of the municipality, but for or subject to extraneous circumstances such as charter arguments. So when we left court on September 17th, that day, after John Conroy and the rest of us finished our reply and concluding statements, the Chief Justice should have or could have, right, if he was ready to rule in favor of the city and close these illegal operating dispensaries, well then, he could have. But he didn't. He didn't make any interim rulings for dispensaries or these shops to close down. So against that backdrop, we have a reserved judgment. And I've been asked every day by someone, when will we know? When will we know? Well, the answer is it could be tomorrow, next month, next week, but I don't think it'll be next year. I mean, Allard was 8 months from the end of the trial, but we're not sitting around and waiting for the Chief Justice to rule in our favor. We have been John Conroy spoke to us, and I've taken the initiative to spearhead this process of reaching out across Canada to get affidavits from medical patients who fit a very strict criteria, by which under practice direction under the Supreme Court civil rules, we can make an application, and we're hoping in the next 2 weeks to do this, whereby we can go before the Chief Justice with these affidavits that show the following. Are you a medical patient? Yes. Are you signed up with a licensed producer? Yes. When licensed producers can't provide the strain or medicine you require, do you go to the black market? Yes. Now, post-legalization, do you still access cannabis from a licensed producer? No. Why not? There is none. Where do you go? Back to the black market, right?
Right.
So it means that although we've seen patient growers and so on and the right to grow, that's a different fight. This is very specific because it shows that beautiful dichotomy of, as a medical patient registered under the legal Medical Health Canada system, do I break the law and forgo my medicine, thereby causing or undermining integrity of the body, which again is a charter issue under Section 7, along with accessing my medicine as a patient, versus following the law and going without or going to jail if I do. And that's really where the rubber's hitting the road here, and why I believe we're at a reserved judgment, because the Chief Justice is going to have to reconcile some pretty irreconcilable issues between the three levels of government and how patients access cannabis. So something's got to give.
Well, for sure. I mean, you're telling me that my only legal access is through the LP system, and the LP system is failing to provide patients.
You are.
So you're forcing me onto the street, and then you're telling me I'm going to be arrested if I do that. How the hell can that be in Canada?
Let me just be clear for the listeners and everyone involved. If you are a medical patient registered under Health Canada, right? That's perfect, because, you're not going to be able to access your medicine. And so that clearly shows that the government system is defective. And yes, you're right. You are faced with the risk of losing your children, civil forfeiture, criminal record, problems at work, losing your job, all because of this strict regimented monopoly with regards to accessing cannabis from a government system where there's none available. I mean, is this Cuba?
Yeah. I mean, this would never happen with any other medicine that a doctor recommends that you use.
That's right. And we made that point, at least I remember I did in my closing arguments, that everything else, I mean, tell me something that, under regular medical use that is sold in a pharmacy. I mean, what else under the Food and Drug Act do we order on an online mail order system exclusively? Nothing that I can.
Nothing. It doesn't make sense. You got recreational users that can go to a store and purchase it, but yet you got a medical patient who can't go to sure they can go to a rec store, but they can't go to a rec store and ask and talk medical and get information and stuff like that. So they need to be able to go to a dispensary to get that type of information.
Now, that's another challenge we're definitely going to see, whether it's brought by my group of lawyers or some other lawyers. But I throw it out there that if you read the Cannabis Act, I believe it's Section 17, right, whereby at point of sale locations, so at the moment there's 2 of those in BC, Kimberley and the store and government store in Kamloops. The only thing that they can discuss when asked about a product is price and availability. How's that going to work? A lot of these restrictions have been directly imported and imputed from the JTI and RJR McDonald tobacco litigation cases. But the saving grace of cannabis is that unlike tobacco, I'll be generous, it has 0 to medicinal medical value, whereas cannabis, it's infinite by comparison. So why do we have these same restrictions, which are designed to reduce harm in tobacco and suppress patients being able to access and navigate and transgress through this system to ultimately connect with the medicine that is going to make the difference between life, liberty, happiness, and sickness and death?
Well, that's it. We've got a peculiar mix going on where we have a medicine that's being regulated like tobacco and may had laws instituted on it like alcohol. So it's kind of an odd little mix going on that doesn't really make much sense.
No, but it's, I guess, designed by the government to, well, again, it's being a lawyer, and government, unfortunately, is made up of more lawyers than it should be, tend to embrace precedents and pro formas. Well, the closest precedent pro forma situation that the government has already essentially applied to the system, and it seems to be working with some success compared to not having them in place, and that is private liquor stores. Unfortunately, private liquor stores and the ability to access information about alcohol is significantly different than what is legally available under the law, which ultimately then we have freedom of speech issues, which is Section 2B of the Charter. And ultimately, why should there be a recreational product or price and a medical price? I mean, if there is the distinction, and I think until the government gets it right, there has to be a distinction for the protection of medical users. Because again, if you're a 50 gram a day user, and I know patients out there that are, and they're turning that 50 grams into 5 ounces of oil, or 50 ounces of oil from the 50 or from the grammage that they can convert it to, basically for their needs, which they can't access under the system. And so this for plant nonsense and recreational, it's just for people that are ignorant and don't really understand cannabis, which unfortunately is the masses.
No, that's for sure. People don't understand the conversion rates at all when you're using it for medicinal value. Medicinal patients aren't sitting around smoking joints. That's what recreational consumers do. I'm not saying medicinal users don't do that, because we do that recreationally, but that's not how we medicate. We're medicating with lotions and creams and potions and tinctures and bath bombs and oils and a host of products. And it takes larger quantities to go into that to make these products than a simple amount of flour for a joint. That's for sure. With the class action lawsuit, if you guys prevail, what will change?
Well, I don't necessarily want to call it a class action lawsuit.
Sorry, the not class action. I used the wrong word. Test case.
I think the technical word would be constitutional reference case.
Okay, there we go.
In this case, let's just call it the test case. I know what you're meaning. What will happen is as follows. If the government, I'll try to take you through this step by step per level of government. So if our arguments at the municipal level are successful, that one, it is illegal, the government of Vancouver or the municipality of Vancouver does not have VERAs or jurisdiction to regulate how they have, then that would be a finding that the legislation and the MMRU or cannabis store retail license regs would be declared illegal and ultra vires, which is basically a Latin term for out of jurisdiction. So that's the constitutional administrative side there dealing with the illegality. And if there's an extreme finding like that, that would then mean that all the bylaw fines and so on would probably be found for illegality as well. So that's a big, big argument. More importantly, with regards to the access, and the city of Vancouver said at all points, well, that's a federal government issue, not us. Well, no. The city of Vancouver, let's all not forget, introduced a buffering distance system of 300 meters, which they claimed is best practice from Colorado. Well, alcohol in Vancouver through the liquor store guidelines and the liquor regulations say that, or the recommendation is that a liquor retail store should not be, so it should not, must not, should not be located from a school, park, community center, church, whatever. But that rule isn't really followed in Vancouver. Whereas with cannabis, unlike alcohol, it's 300 meters, and you got to go through the Board of Variance, which essentially has been an elimination strategy. But more importantly, this 300 meters at the city of Vancouver, which again claim that they're legalizing and regulating because of medical access and getting patients away from and medical and harm substitution, and again to reduce or help access and reduce access from alcohol and more harmful substances. But it doesn't seem that way. And on top of that, the 300 meters, which they say is best practice from Washington, Colorado, isn't best practice at all to do with business licensing and land use, which again is the only jurisdiction that the city of Van has. That 300 buffer originates from U.S. federal criminal sentencing guidelines, which are known as drug-free zone laws. And they were designed in the 1970s and employed at the height of the 80s in the crack epidemic, and operate as follows. Basically, if you're a crack dealer and you sell within 300 meters of a school, it's not just the trafficking possession. It's a secondary offense with an enhanced penalty because of the location to the school. Now, the beauty is, as we brought experts in on our case, that these drug-free zone laws have proven to be highly problematic with adverse consequences in highly urbanized areas, especially with blacks, Latinos, and so on, which begs the question, why the hell has the city of Vancouver adopted quote-unquote best practice, which really is criminal sentencing guidelines, which have been found to be prejudicial, leading 7 states, including Washington, Massachusetts, and Connecticut, for starters, to reduce their drug-free zone laws from 300 meters to 150. Now, the funny thing going on this, in Colorado, you had the attorney general for the state, and this is in our affidavits from our expert, stating that they contacted dispensaries in Colorado within the 300 meters saying, look, fellas, you got to move. We want to help you. The last thing we want is dispensaries within 300 meters, not because of the schools and the kids and all that, although that is important. It's because we don't want the FBI and the DEA and the federal government of the United States kicking our doors in. So you tell me how that has any bearing or application on a sovereign country like Canada, who's legalizing at the national level for starters, which is you have a municipality adopting law from a state which is illegal at the federal level and has nothing to do with land use and business licensing. So it'll be interesting to see whether that has impacted and caused barriers to patient access? Because if it does, that in itself also triggers Section 7. And the compelling evidence that I put together and my team did on this part of the case, where we zeroed right in, was we looked at how Vancouver licensed. And my feeling is this: if you have 100 plus dispensaries, which is, again, one of the justifications for the city licensing, you would say, or they said that, we're going to license and do this fairly. Well, they only have 19 at the moment. So you look at that, just the numbers there, 19 out of 100, 19%. That would tell me that is a restriction on the access. Let's take it a step further. The city of Vancouver appeared in presentations at a number of the events that Kim kind of mentioned that I speak at or present at. I was on a panel with Wally Opal that day, and we had Carrie Jang and the former head of license and planning, Andrea Toma, and they gave a presentation showing numbers and metrics, and the metric that stuck out with the 300-meter licensing zoning restriction from schools, community centers, and so on. Essentially, you got like 91% of the applicants or so are ineligible. And I can prove that because in their slideshow, they said, applying the criteria that we've adopted under the MMRU, 11 meet the criteria at this time. So that takes that number from 19 to 11. When the last time was 11% out of 100 a good thing, right? It's sort of simple math. And of course, there was no objection from, the only real objections we had from the federal government had to do with whether or not, we could prove standing, which we did. Again, my office was able to argue, and we got an order during the hearing granting us private interest standing and public interest standing. So I can explain more about that. And just to sum up the point, I'm feeling pretty good that if we get the opportunity just to say, Judge, here are affidavits. We've got, 15 or 20 of them, but you only really need to look at 3 or 4 of them. Subject to exclusionary rules of evidence, I can't see how Health Canada is going to want to cross-examine patients, because some of our patients work for LPs, which is awesome. And, but going back, ultimately, the city of Vancouver, with regard to excluding the evidence, wanted to exclude Mark Hayden, who's the executive director of MAPS Canada, and then Josh Capel, who was our expert from Vicente Sederberg regarding Colorado and their legalization under Amendment 64. Why was he good? Because he drafted it. So that's why the city of Vancouver, they didn't want to cross-examine Josh Capel. They just wanted to exclude the evidence as being irrelevant. And so I was able to argue that, look, whether or not you regard Josh Capel or Mark Hayden's evidence as expert, the lay witness will tell you that's 19 out of 100 or 11 out of 100 at the time. So if that's not a barrier to patient access or a restriction, I don't know what is. Now, moving on to the provincial government, at this stage, they're not really involved because they didn't delegate authority and say, do this, Vancouver. In fact, they kind of been scratching their heads saying WTF, right?
Yeah.
And then Victoria went ahead and did it, and a few other municipalities. So with regard to the test case, because we filed our pleadings before the new BC law and the Cannabis Act came in, our stance was pretty limited against the federal government. But because the federal government didn't delegate to Vancouver, that puts them in the soup, which now brings us to the federal government. And the access arguments under Section 7 are pretty clear, because let's take that fictional homeless person who doesn't have a credit card or a bank account, who's mentally ill, using cannabis. I mean, what are they supposed to do? Get a prepaid Visa card, go in, open up a Google account, order cannabis that won't be shipped to an address because they don't have a fixed address. So, I mean, that in itself is the failure of the medical system. And those were good points that Jack, Lloyd, myself, and, John Conroy certainly highlighted. Definitely when Jack and John cross-examined Todd Kane, who's the executive director from Health Canada. So, I mean, just to conclude on this little bit here, I mean, other experts that came were Dr. Jacobus Zaberkis from Texas, who is essentially a microbiologist and a Lithuanian national who's very involved in the study. And so he was basically able to explain to the Chief Justice, which was fantastic, what a terpene was. The Chief Justice asked me, forgive my ignorance, what is a terpene? And he explained. And so that was, again, another line of argument and reasoning that you need to be able to attend a storefront, smell, see the cannabis. Why? Because the terpenoid and the different profiles to a seasoned cannabis medicinal user, could be the difference between a substitute product that will work and something that you may have adverse effects from just from the smell.
Yep.
Yeah.
And those points really, along with a heck of a lot of others, got us to where we got a reserve judgment, which in the circumstances feels like a win either way. It's kind of like when my buddy who played for the Canadian field hockey team and they draw 2-2 against Pakistan, they did a victory lap, right? That's kind of how we feel here with going the distance. And now with the rollout of legalization being just, it couldn't be any worse, that I sort of look in the boxing analogy that if the government's on the ropes now, let's not wait for the Chief Justice. Let's just knock him out. Not the Chief Justice, but the government defective system now, and get a ruling sooner or get provisions in place. And one of the points John Conroy wants us to argue, and he's been wonderful as a mentor and directing, these proceedings in the direction of this. He should be retired, but he's suggested, that we ask the judge to essentially put some interim provisions that could mean that at least the participating dispensaries that have been in the test case may be open for another 6 months or a year, depending on whether or not now at the federal level, the judge sees that, the Vancouver bylaws and the ACMPR and the restrictions on cannabis under the CDSA, if the judge finds that they do fall afoul of being beyond minimal impairment of the charter right of life, liberty, and security of the person under Section 7 of the Charter, that's a mouthful, provided that's the case, then all the Chief Justice can do is declare those offending provisions incompatible with the Charter, which then means, like Allard and other cases, the government will probably have 6 months, unless they can make a reasonable argument to the contrary as to why they need longer to come up with a system to facilitate some form of medical patient access through a storefront. That's probably as far as I can take this fight, because at the end of the day, what are we going to then, that says nothing about the supply, but the dire access needs illustrate clearly that we need to not lower the standards of licenses, but figure out a sensible standard that works, so that more people can get in the game, produce cannabis, and that cannabis can get to market, and the taxes raised can, be recouped and paid to the government as applicable.
Well, and that's just it, right? The majority of them that are already in the game now and have been in the game and basically created this industry that we already have, that the government is trying to wipe out for some reason and start from frickin' scratch. Who knows why? But we already have it. And they're all standing there with their hands stretched out saying, here, take my money, give me a license, test my product because it's all good. Let's do this.
What I don't understand is, look at how wheat, in the old days was sold with the wheat board, right? I don't know why we couldn't have growers of varying degrees and licenses show up with their various bushels at, however, the industry agrees, and then you weigh it and test it and give the weed of that grade and standard a price. And I think you'll see that the quality in the cannabis that's produced locally will go up and the price will go down because we're blessed with such an abundance of it.
Yeah.
It sounds like a sales barn where you can take where the rural community can take your cows and your pigs to in order to sell them at the market.
We got one around the corner. Yeah.
Yeah, same here. Rob, you've only got about another 10 or 15 minutes left at the most. And we do have some questions from some of the people who saw the post. Yeah. So, can we switch to rapid fire questions for the last couple minutes?
Yeah. Okay. So let's get started with that. We had a whole bunch of them between Al and myself. There was quite a large number that were all surrounding the same sort of issue, and that was your storage amount under the Cannabis Act. There's various versions of this going around out there, and and people seem to have a difference of opinion on what's what. Various issues around storage amounts. What is the legal storage amount? So Al's got a series that we're going to start off with that.
Yeah, well, that's basically the first question. Is the storage amount, it's always been what the government set by the grammage and everything. My understanding now under the Cannabis Act is that the storage limits have been lifted because the rec users don't have a limit other than in British Columbia. What's that?
Rec users, unless it's changed, and again, I've been so focused on our test case, but correct me if I'm wrong, but under the rec market, you have a limit of 30 grams.
Right? That's the carry.
That's your carry. We're talking about storage.
So for storage, for rec, you got to think of this, that you're doing it under a recreational situation, which is different than medical, which is why to answer your question is, well, what is the storage and the max? It's whatever you want it to be if you can understand how to present the situation to the government. And ultimately, and depending on the direness of the situation, some clients that I have put in touch with the right doctors and so on have been able to get, as high as 500 gram a day licenses, which, believe it or not, are done from top to bottom in order to illustrate the severity of the condition. And again, it's one of those things that it depends. It's all relative. I mean, the hard and fast rules, they are what they are. They're there, read it. And if it's not clear, well, it's ultimately what you can argue and justify. And that's the beauty of all this, that there's a lot more latitude and flexibility under the medical system, which, if you want my advice, I don't know why you would dump 25 million into an LP when you could probably put 500 grand into a decent medical facility on, C1 light industrial or, zoning that works for the municipality that you're in, right? With that official community plan, and then do it under a medical license. I can get most of them in 6 months from the government, but it'll probably be only a matter of time where the standards drop to such a point whereby, where we see how micro and craft brewers now, the difference between personal production and commercial production is really just a license. The sophistication and the dedication and intensity and the sophistication is there. It's just the license is different. So I've often thought that that's a good way also, until the rules and the market levels out, that, hey, you can be up and growing, and then at least you have a demonstration project that you could show potential investors. You're like, look at my loop system, my lights, my timing, my genetics, which that's not illegal. What is then illegal, though, is, of course, selling it or doing something outside that circle. But again, that's the terrible answer to that first question.
It's all good. All good.
Now here's one that really doesn't involve that end of things. Let's say you're a designated grower, and you grow your product at a building separate from your residence, okay, and a different address. Now, when you take that product from where it's grown to where you're going to store it at your residence, are you only allowed to bring 150 grams each time, or can you bring your whole garden to your storage location at once?
Yeah, transportation.
Again, what were you authorized under the MMAR versus under the new law? Because if you're under MMAR, or you've moved from MMAR and transferred to a new location from your MMAR grow to somewhere where you're licensed under ACMPR, that could be very different, because ultimately, what is the reason that you're transporting such a significant amount? I mean, if you want to play it safe, 150 gram limit, that might work for some, not for others. The point that I would make is that if you are registered or have been registered under, and there's a genuine need to move that kind of cannabis, well, I think it's one of those things that you should approach legal counsel, because then, we can take this analysis a step further and actually look at it. But generally speaking, you don't want to just move, 300 pounds of weed and claim, oh, I'm a medical patient.
Well, I think it's for a designated grower. So your designated grower is dropping off your crop.
Well, again, what I would suggest is, if the designated grower is leaving the licensed facility, let's say he's growing in Whistler, okay? Yeah. And the patient lives in Vancouver, which means you're going to have to leave or drive through a number of municipalities. Yeah. Well, let's say the max that the grower is, possibly allowed or under, the license, if the designated delivery, the person is arrested in Kelowna, they're kind of like, well, what the hell are you doing there? I mean, you're going between Whistler and Vancouver. There's no reason for you to have that much weed in Kelowna. Clearly, right. Something's up here. But, I've had clients that have had to move their license or wanted to move their license, and they've ended up, mailing themselves 20 pounds of weed using a courier, and then calling me saying, oh, yeah, I moved, and I was going to send it to my friend, and, can I do that? And it's just like, holy crow, man, like this just screams of like stupidity. But in the cases where there's a genuine documented need to get cannabis from A to B, that can be facilitated, because failure to do so would be an infringement under Section 6 of the Charter dealing with mobility rights. So if you live in Ontario and you get a job working for EA out in British Columbia, for example, making video games, and you drive out in your U-Haul filled to the brim with, cannabis, you're probably not going to keep the job at EA, and they're going to wonder why all the cannabis. But if it's 30 pounds and it's stored properly and it's locked and you can have your papers ready, then I think that's a different story. Okay. If you are really concerned, hire a moving or a shipping or a logistics firm that's bonded, and you won't believe the number of times they've transported locked freezers to learn that there's something locked in the freezer. They're bonded, which means if they lose it, well, they at least cover the cost of the freezer.
Yeah. Okay, Kim, jump in there with a couple questions.
Okay, real quick, I don't know if you know much about this or not. This is something that a lot of people are asking me, and I'm curious about too. Under patients helping patients right now, patients are allowed to exchange genetics. We're allowed to exchange crops and that kind of thing. We've got coverage for that. Under the new law for the Cannabis Act, recreational users can exchange, gifts of cannabis up to 30 grams. You can give some to a friend. You're allowed to share. My question is, are patients now allowed to share our genetics with non-medicinal users? Can we share genetics now?
Well, even sharing a joint, right, before technically legalization, and even if the weed's not from an LP and so on, that's still technically trafficking. So in that instance of where you've got a medical user with some fantastic genetics if he just is giving them to somebody who, technically you need to look at, well, is that technically a trafficking situation, right? Because
that's what I mean. Like, is the patient line gone now? Because I mean, there used to be that line in the sand. It was like, patients sharing any prescription. You don't share prescription drugs, that kind of thing.
No,
so is that gone now because of legalization? Can we share with non-patients?
Again, I think it comes really down to what's the intention, the purpose. If your intention, the purpose is you've got some really good strains and genetics that would help some people that are doing something in a rec context for themselves, right? That's different than, okay, I'm going to start selling genetics for profit and get into the production angle of it for profit without a license. I mean, the difficulty is technically you got to look at seeds and genetics are like government hockey cards, right? You can trade them and you can collect them and you can, give your friends some of them. But ultimately, if it's not a government licensed hockey card and you mix in some of your other non-government weed hockey cards, it starts to blur the line. And I think, there are no hard and fast rules. Really what it boils down to, and I guess this is how I answer the question, I don't know is the honest answer. It's the circumstances. But really, it comes to show me. Really, if you're doing what you're doing and someone complains and has a problem, that's when a regulator gets involved. And it's show me. Well, it's, I guess, the difference between washing your car and a neighbor's car, as a good gesture on a hot summer day versus opening up a neighborhood car wash. So right. I guess the better question to you or your listener would be, at what end of the spectrum are you looking to operate? As a goodwill, recreational bottle of wine, or, even the kind of jar of moonshine I made, wink, wink, versus now I'm going to make this my full business, whereby I have duty of care and professional and product liability negligence issues.
Okay. I'm going to try and squeeze one more real quick one in if that's possible. I don't know. I'm going to try here. Native land. Big deal going on in Saskatchewan right now. Native rights versus provincial rights. Does the province have the right to step on inherent right in Saskatchewan? I'm going to point to Ontario, Tyendinaga territory as a model that currently is over and above the regulations that Health Canada offers, and they regulate and operate independently now. And I believe that's the model that Saskatchewan is following. Saskatchewan's not happy about it. They're saying they're going to take them down. Do they got the right or not?
Okay, I'm going to answer this with a very enthusiastic yes, but with some caveats here. Okay, these folks have reached out to me because I've been thinking of this for the last 5 years. My very first legal aid case involved me going to Haida Gwaii to represent a nephew of a hereditary chief, and they both were out shooting seals and sea lions in circumstances which had issue with Department of Fisheries and Oceans. So for me, it was a fantastic, life-changing experience whereby I got the idea, because I used to structure offshore investments, that holy crow, Haida Gwaii could be like the Bermuda of British Columbia, given that this is unceded territory. The Haida haven't signed up to any treaties to the contrary. And essentially, there's more people on the island than there are police and government, whereas I remember saying, wow, the odds are better here than in prison for you guys just to take your island back. Then we started thinking about wineries and cannabis, and I think it's quite exciting because, yes, these nations, unless they've signed an agreement with the province or, depending on their treaty status, any particular rights limiting what goes on their land, then I think the answer is an enthusiastic yes. And of course, the Attorney General of Saskatchewan's going to say, oh, they don't have that right. Well, if the weed or the medicine, they can also prove that unlike West Coast First Nations, they can probably show on on the prairies that they had connection to the Sioux and other prairie groups from the, southern United States that, you can definitely prove origins of cannabis grow production and use, but also in the trade. We have to remember most of the good weed in the BC comes from, and the genetics come from draft dodgers fleeing the Vietnam War. Cannabis is not indigenous to British Columbia, which can make some of these arguments, charter arguments, possibly in the case of Haida, real difficult. But in the Saskatchewan Carry the Kettle Nation group, they're also a J Treaty nation. I've actually represented some of their nation on, family cases involving, removal and government stuff. And they're J Treaty, which means they have special status with regards to their ability to go to the United States and do work and business, because a J Treaty nation was basically acknowledged by Canada, United States, and Britain, or those groups at the time, as existing, and therefore to preserve their ability to, go hunting and migrate or visit other bands and trade and engage in the nomadic ways, especially on the prairies. They may have more of an argument that cannabis is part of their natural pharmacopoeia. And so if it's being produced on their land by their people, right, utilizing their own electricity, water, and so on, well, ultimately, that then is more of a criminal issue. People going on to the reserve, buying it, not paying the taxes, because again, this is on banned land, and then taking that product and consuming it off the reservation. Again, right. The answer is different if you buy the weed on the land and you got to sign a declaration, or, they force you to consume it before you leave. So technically you're not taking anything off the land, is another story. But I do think it paints a picture that cannabis has really been a race to the bottom. And if groups like First Nations are going to embrace the healthcare angle and say, we're going to do this for our people and heal our people, and if we can make a profit, along the way, as First Nations have done with bingo, alcohol, and other vice, then you know what? More power to them. They should have been consulted. They weren't. So I guess that federal and provincial duty to consult hasn't been done, meaning that the Supreme Court of Canada will be waiting with open arms, because they are the best friends of the First Nations when it comes to their sovereign integrity on their land.
Yeah, well, there you go. So they're in for province is in for a fight, I think, and I think First Nations are ready to provide that. I don't think the province of Saskatchewan is going to get their way with this at all.
Let's take this scenario. You got the Carry the Kettle Nation producing cannabis. They take it cross-border to, a band in North Dakota. I mean, who's south of Saskatchewan? Probably the Dakotas. Yeah. Whereby then that nation, who's also a J Treaty nation, decides to then take that Canadian Saskatchewan-grown cannabis, convert it into extract. Can they then sell that back into Canada without duty? Yeah. That's where I think there's going to be fantastic opportunities to utilize a lot of the same structures that have been corporate commercial structures that I used to engage in when I was structuring offshore investment funds for major hedge funds.
Yeah, I mean, the crossing the international borders, being on native land, there are no international borders for them. So going back and forth to the USA is just as easy as going across the street.
Oh, no, so exactly. So, I mean, honestly, these kind of issues with the constitutional and restrictions, and that really interests me. And I mean, another one before we go, like Hawaii blew my mind when I was there last year, and again, very recently. But if you're a medical cannabis user, let's just take the proverbial cancer patient or someone very sick. Well, and you own a gun. Let's say you live in a remote part of Hawaii where there's poachers or thieves, who knows. you now have to be in the position of either accessing your medicine or gun registration. Now, I'm not a proponent of gun laws, but in that instance where if you don't have to be on a registry at a liquor store if you own a gun, then why should you be having to forfeit your medicine? Now, again, I don't think it's a carte blanche that just because, you own a gun, you should have access to weed. But if there are the right channels and
there's no reason that we should stop you from owning a gun. I mean, they give it to blind people now. You can be legally blind and own a gun, but if you smoke or use medical cannabis, you can't.
Ridiculous. But anyway, I was actually in Las Vegas, and I'll conclude with this. But it blows my mind how you can smoke and drink on the floor of the casinos. And I was vaping away just like, screw it. So then I said, look, can I bring Pit Boss? I said, can I talk to the Pit Boss? And I said, let me understand this, right? The cannabis is recreationally legal in the state of Nevada. And he's like, yes, sir. And I said, okay, what about in the casino? And he said, I just want to roll one up right now and burn one at the table. Can I do that? And he's like, well, no, absolutely not. But yet I can, smoke tobacco and drink, which is interesting because in BC, you couldn't do any of that under the workers' compensation and, safe air and all these other rules. But Las Vegas, I mean, it was crazy. You can do anything on the gaming floor, but yet burn cannabis. You can vape, all sorts of stuff. Yeah. But it's, again, I don't know if it didn't seem to be a big deal with everything else going on in Vegas. And on that,
I know. Ridiculous, right? I've heard of people getting kicked out of hotel rooms and, a $500 fine if you're caught smoking a joint on the Strip.
Well, this is just it. I mean, there's just so many other things going on in Las Vegas that, again, I think if you're like, forgive my language, being an asshole and loud on the Strip, you're probably going to get a fine and a whole bunch of other things for that. But again, if you do it discreetly, there's enough smoking areas in Las Vegas, which is kind of gross. I think it's just pick your battles. I mean, this again is an interesting place, and the MJ BizCon was insane. I mean, I don't know how many lights, fans, ballasts, and nutroponics we need, but I sort of see this whole cannabis industry going very much like how the American domestic motorcycle industry went. From in 1922, there were over 200 domestic manufacturers of motorbikes. By 1947, after, World War II and some significant standardization, that number was 2, Harley and Indian. But the difference is we're not dealing with motorbikes. We're dealing with medicine, the cannabis medicine in all of its forms. So who knows what we have in store? It's been an absolute pleasure and honor to be on your show, and I think we're just getting started. So if I can be of any assistance with follow-up, I'm there for you guys.
Yes. Well, why don't you let our listeners know where they can find you if they have any questions? And we will most certainly have to have you come back. Like you said, we just got started. We're running over your time now. You're running late. So
sure.
We'll have to have you
Let me
back.
give a shout out then. Again, if you want to find me, my law firm is known as Ad Lucem Law Corporation. That's ADLUCEM, means toward or to the light in Latin. My direct phone number is 604-218-1084. And you can Google my name or Ad Lucem and find more information about how to reach me. My webpage needs desperately to be updated because I've been too busy to do it. But anyway, the essentials are there. Phone and email.
Awesome. There we go. So if you want to get in touch with Rob, you need more information, or you'd like to talk about anything that's going on in the cannabis world, or you need a lawyer or some advice, give the company a call. They'd be happy to help you out and hear from you and do what they can to help you out in the future. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us and staying over time that you were supposed to be here. So I really appreciate it, Rob.
Oh, this was a pleasure. Have a great evening. We'll talk again soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
You too, Rob. Bye-bye. Thank you. All right. Well, there goes Rob. We appreciate him coming on to the show and talking to us tonight and our listeners.
Yeah, for sure. We ran overtime with him, and we did it commercial free and ad free and news free. So we're going to run for a quick break right now, right?
That's right. We're going to run for a break. So tonight's bumper music is by the Killing Time Band. And my song that was connecting to Rob was Policeman, because he usually has to deal with the results. The policeman showing up, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and then after the break, I guess Kim and I will have a quick gab about some news and quick review. And other than that, you're listening to the Pace Radio Show. We are on 420radio.ca.
Hey, this is Cheech. And this is Chong. And you're listening to Lifestyle Radio. What is it? Lifestyle Radio. Say it one more time. 420 Radio? Ooh.
Hang up and try again.
You're listening to Lifestyle Radio.
Policemen always come and take my lead. Policemen always come and take my lead. Policemen always come and take my lead. Policemen always come and take my lead.
Enjoy the buzz of legalization with Canadays, your friendly neighborhood Campbellford head shop. From lights to plant nutrients, books, consumption accessories, and more, we've got all your basics to grow or consume cannabis. Let us help you grow your four with weekly Tuesday night gardening sessions for beginners. Visit our info center or take a look at our piercing services and body jewelry, now available in-store through Campbellford Lifestyle Shop. Canadays, more than just a head shop. 17 Bridge Street West, Campbellford.
Are you looking for cannabis news, education, and people's opinions? Are you looking to learn what Canadian and international cannabis advocates are doing, not only now, but what got them to this point in their lives, and what does the future hold for them? Do you want to learn how patients are using cannabis as their daily medication, or learn how their cannabis use helps them with their medical condition? If you answered yes to any of these questions, then I'm going to suggest to you to tune in to Lifestyle Radio. Catch their live weekly shows and have your questions and concerns answered and find the experience you're looking for. Monday, catch your weekly news broadcast with the Reef Reporters. Then on Wednesday, get several hours worth of cannabis public education. We get things started with Cannabis and Coffee with Tamarawana. Finish up your evening with the award-winning Pace Radio Show with Al Graham, and no week would be complete without tuning into Friday night's program, the 420 Radio Show featuring Al Rapp and the 420 Radio crew, Mary Jane Baker and Marcel Gignac. Cannabis is a lifestyle, and you can catch all your cannabis lifestyle information right here at 420radio.ca. An apple a day won't keep this doctor away, but a gram of cannabis may keep you away from the doctor. Find out how by tuning into The Higher Estate with Dr. Ira Price, Wednesdays at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, only here at 420radio.ca. Tune in to DJ Passion from the land of Ganja, the island of Jamaica, when he comes to you live every Saturday night at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on 420radio.ca.
Canada, the time to act is now. These days, your customers are seeking variety. Increase your earning potential by expanding your inventory with CC Nexus, Canada's largest cannabis seed wholesaler. CC Nexus stocks over 60 reputable breeders, including Canuck seeds, with a wealth of autoflower, regular, feminized, and CBD strains. All first-time customers will receive a free pack of Canuck seeds, plus a mug, t-shirt, and additional promotional materials. Add strains and increase your profit with CC Nexus, your Canadian-owned and operated wholesaler of cannabis seeds. Discreet, worldwide stealth shipping from Canada, supporting you locally. Call today, 1-844-843-7995, 1-844-843-7995, or visit us at ccnexus.global.
I am just a man who is doing what he can, but policemen instead of red and blue. Policemen always come and take my weed. Policemen always come and take my weed.
Hey, hello, we're back. You're listening to the award-winning Pace Radio Show. We are live here at 420radio.ca, or you could catch us at the Pace Radio Show website, found at pace-online.ca. Tonight, our guest was Robert W.E, the lawyer, at Lucem Law is his practice, and unfortunately, he couldn't stay for the whole show, but he spent a full hour with Kim and I, right, Kim?
Yeah, it was great that he stayed a little bit extra time with us. It was awesome, unexpected. Lawyers, I mean, their time is valuable. They're very, very busy. It was great that he spent that hour and a bit with us.
Yes, exactly. You know, we didn't even play a commercial break. We went right through that whole hour to give him as much time as we could to talk to us, and he covered a lot on that constitutional challenge.
Yeah,
he
certainly did. He certainly did. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with that. We'll be keeping an eye on it, and we'll get an update as soon as they hear anything, I'm sure, from Rob.
Yeah, because it's all in the hands of the judge now. Like, they're just waiting.
Yep.
For the result. That could be, as he said, they waited 8 months for Allard.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. They when they reserve the decision, they're taking their time. They're reviewing everything, and they're mulling it all over and trying to figure it all out. And then sometimes that takes quite a while. There's a lot of documents that are submitted, right? Yeah,
and it's back to, like you said, back to Parker. Pace is being able to get a supply. And, they've got affidavits from patients saying that they're not getting their supply of cannabis because they're sold out.
Yeah.
And so now they've taken that out to court, and we'll see what happens. And that's going to affect countrywide, eh?
Yeah, and we're hearing that from patients everywhere, from coast to coast. Patients are complaining about availability of product. They're going on to their LP websites. Nothing available. Everything is out of stock. Everything is out of stock. It's like, well, now what do I do? And I've said this about the government time and time again. Their tagline, their go-to line is, what about the children? Well, I'll ask them one more time. Yep. What about the children? Because you know what? A lot of those patients are kids, and they rely on those strains of medications to keep stuff like seizures away, cancer at bay, a host of issues that kids are going through. And now all of a sudden, the meds aren't available.
They're not there.
So they're not there. So, yeah, what about the children?
And it doesn't make sense how come a patient can't walk into a specialty store. And this was one question I didn't get to ask him. Could the government be looking at the Shoppers Drug Marts who have the licenses? Could they be looking at them as being the new dispensary where the patient can actually go in, receive the same product as they would at a retail store, but be able to get questions in and ask for advice and guidance?
A lot of people think that's the model that they're looking at, and that's the route that it's going to take, because corporations like Shoppers Drug Mart have been provided with licenses and retail places and so forth. So we're thinking that that's probably going to wind up being the route. We're going to wind up having storefront operations like the OCS, or depending on where you live. If you're in Ontario, it's the Ontario Cannabis Store. And then maybe, down the block, there could be a Shoppers Drug Mart cannabis store where patients can pick up their prescription. So, yeah, it may wind up being a dual retail scheme with registered drugstores taking over.
Yeah. Yeah, and whether they only allow the big corporate ones, like you're seeing in Shoppers Drug Mart, or will they allow smaller places?
Yeah, mom and pop dispensaries that are taking care of patients today, will they have an opportunity in a medicinal market? I don't know.
I don't know. Will they require special licenses? Like a pharmacy?
Are you going to have to be a pharmacist?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's very true. That's what that's what may happen in the end.
Don't know.
So.
Don't know.
All right. Well, talking about shortages, we see here in the news article that we had picked for today was the fact that in Alberta, they've put up a out of stock sign in their windows.
Yeah, Alberta is not open for business. The pot cupboards are almost bare. Stores are closing down. Hours of ones that are open are being limited. And it's not just in Alberta that we're seeing this.
No. Well, even like in Alberta, they're even stopped issuing licenses.
Yeah, they're not going to let anybody else open up stores because they see the writing on the wall. The ones that they have currently, the cupboards are bare. So what's the point in opening more stores if we don't have product to supply them?
They said that they ordered enough product to support 250 retail stores for 6 months. However, as of November the 17th, they had only received 20% of what they had ordered.
20%.
20%.
Failure to deliver on a contract is serious business.
I would think so.
It's not. This is nothing. Any other industry in the business world, this is unheard of. It's failure to deliver on contract. These people were under contractual obligation to deliver a product. If they didn't have the supply to deliver that contract, that's negotiating in bad faith. That's breach of contract. There's a host of things here.
Yeah,
happen.
And like they have their contract, but they say that they've reached out to, they say right here, contracting all producers with federal licenses. They were unsuccessful to get any because nobody's got any to sell.
Doesn't exist. Nobody's got any to sell. Every province is going to go through this at some point, either sooner rather than later, depending on how much they got off their original contract. Some provinces got a little bit more than others. Some provinces are selling a little bit more than others, so they're running out a little bit faster. But the numbers just aren't there to sustain us nationwide. We knew that going in, so I'm not surprised.
Well, of the two, they had planned on 250 stores. They've got 65 that are currently licensed. So they can't even put enough cannabis in to do 65 stores.
No.
And those stores were going to be split weekly shipments.
Yep.
So they're going to try to share it amongst them.
They're going to try and share it, and they've got to try and split it up. It's being rationed. That's right. It's like wartime rations. Here's your allotted amount. You're not allowed any more. On your way now. Next. The whole thing is just ridiculous. The only way to solve it is to roll in the so-called gray market product that is readily available in dispensaries across the country that operate in the major cities in every province in this country right now currently. There's plenty of product in those. They're not having a shortage. There is no problem. Native land, there's another opportunity. Plenty of product going on in the indigenous territories of that are self-governed and that are growing their own. They have their own crops going on. Let's incorporate it. There is product to purchase. Go buy it.
Well, in Alberta, their online store has 19 products available out of 146. I know right now you can go down to Tag and Aga, you can grab out of Legacy there. They've got like 65, 70 strains.
How great would that be, though? The Canadian government go down to Tyendinaga and purchase, a couple of kilos. Let's restock the OCS.
Well, yeah, there's, they've got 40 or 50 places down there. We've got the Green Mile over here on the other end of me here. Well, I'm sitting here, just as you know, I'm at Canada's. I'm sitting here with Wayne. We were talking there a little bit earlier about stores. You said people have come in here and asked you here at Canada's whether you're going to have a retail store. Basically, what have you been telling them?
Well, right now with the shortages and the government's predicting 2 years, I say government's been wrong and everything else. There's going to be at least 5 year shortages. And, if people are going to jump in, borrow $250,000 to get their licenses, get everything in order, get their stores up to shape, those loans are going to be called due long before this product. And I think there's going to be a lot of people that are going to lose everything, their life savings, and they're just going to fall flat on their face because they're going to jump the gun too quick.
So you're just going to basically sit back?
I've decided I'm going to sit back because for 5 years there's definitely going to be these shortage problems.
You're a smart man in waiting. People that are jumping on the bandwagon, you're absolutely right, Wayne. I think a lot of people are going to lose their shirts because there's just not enough legal product to sell out of these stores to sustain you. How can you sustain a business and pay the bills of that business and only operate 2 days a week with a limited supply on those 2 days a week? It's not a sustainable business model for any operation, no matter what you're selling. You're not going to make it. Cannabis is no different.
I think in one of our reefer reports lately, it's been talking about there was a family that put a bunch of money, into opening, getting a store in Newfoundland, and that's what they're going through.
Yeah. It's an evolving situation, that's for sure. Yeah, well, there'll be much more to come in the future.
Yeah. Well,
one thing that's for certain is the banks have no mercy.
That's for sure.
And it's they can say there's 120 licenses or 140 places that are licensed, but if they've only got 70 or 80 of them, they're actually producing or have a license to sell, then it's going to take a while. We know it's like a 2-year plus process for them to get licensed. The guy there from I think it's SSV down in Coburg at the craft plant, like he's saying, you might as well allow the black market to allow their supply to be used because like they've been waiting a year for a sales license.
Yep. It's crazy. Yeah, for sure. But anyways, on that note, crazy, speaking of crazy, I'm going to get my crazy on. So it's been a great show talking to Rob and discussing all of the things going on with Constitution, with, I guess, what is it? No, it's not constitutional challenge, right?
Yeah. Test case.
That's what he likes to say.
So did you want to throw your shout out?
Yeah, I'm going to throw my shout out. My shout out is going out to the girls that are already out there without me, that said they were listening on their headsets at the bar. I don't believe you. We'll find out when I get there.
Bar, where are you going?
Way out the door.
Bar.
I'm on my way out the door. I'm going to a bar, which is something I rarely do. I haven't been to a bar for years. I'm going out with the girls. It's a girls' night out. We're going to see the Magic Mike Mail Review at the Vic Tavern in Timmins. It's a ladies' night out at the Vic. I'll see y'all there, girls.
Okay, Kim, you have a good time then.
All right.
Okay, I'll be back next week with my joint host, Debbie Stoll-Skiffin, and a special guest. You can find the Pace Radio Show. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. We're on Instagram. We're on the web at pace-online.ca. Thank you to our sponsors, the friendly folks at CC Nexus. You can find them at ccnexus.global. LRAP at 420radio.ca. Big, huge thank you to our guest tonight, lawyer Robert W.E of Lucem Law. Thank you to you, Kim. Have a good time tonight, too, while you're out there.
Oh, I most certainly will. And a shout out, thank you to the guys, management at the Vic, for saving me a table, knowing I was on the air tonight.
And take lots of bills with you, small bills.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, and a big thank you to our listeners. Thank you for tuning in the show. Thank you, and good night.
Good night.
So what are you doing? Nothing? Why not?
I'm trying to get on this Lifestyle Radio website.
Sounds like a cool website.
Yeah, it's alright. Oh, wait, I might have it.
You might have it.
You're listening to Lifestyle Radio.
Now I'm walking down the street, burning a split to beat the heat. When policemen always come and take my weed.
Canada, the time to act is now. These days, your customers are seeking variety. Increase your earning potential by expanding your inventory with CC Nexus, Canada's largest cannabis seed wholesaler. CC Nexus stocks over 60 reputable breeders, including Canuck seeds, with a wealth of autoflower, regular, feminized, and CBD strains. All first-time customers will receive a free pack of Canuck seeds, plus a mug, t-shirt, and additional promotional materials. Add strains and increase your profit with CC Nexus, your Canadian-owned and operated wholesaler of cannabis seeds. Discreet, worldwide stealth shipping from Canada, supporting you locally. Call today 1-844-843-7995, 1-844-843-7995, or visit us at ccnexus.global.
Hi, this is Al Graham of the Pace Radio Show. Are you keeping pace, as in keeping people advocating cannabis education? If you're not, and you're a cannabis consumer, then why not? Others are working hard every day to help educate people about cannabis so you can enjoy your daily 420. Get involved and speak out. Be loud and proud so that you can keep pace. Tune into the Pace Radio Show every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to hear about people advocating cannabis education here at 420radio.ca. Catch Cannabis and Coffee to Marijuana live every Wednesday at 12 noon Eastern, 10 Mountain Time, only here at 420radio.ca. Join Reefer reporters Al Graham and his rotating news desk anchors Kim Cooper or Green Irene York for their weekly Reefer report here on 420radio.ca. Together, the trio spread Canadian and international cannabis news to their weekly listeners. Tune in every Monday around 4:20 p.m. Eastern Standard Time every week as these veteran news hawks discuss and give their opinion on the previous week in cannabis news. Don't forget, catch the Reefer reporters here at 420radio.ca. Catch the wild, crazy, and the serious Friday night, 7 p.m. on the 420 Radio Show, only here at 420radio.ca.
Man, have you been to Canadays yet? Canadays, Campbellford's premier cannabis culture shop. They've got bongs, oil rigs, grinders, and papers. Everything you need for consumption. They've got soil, nutrients, and dome trays too. Everything you need for cultivation. Canadays. They've got all kinds of awesome cannabis novelties, clothing, and apparel. I know, right? It's a lot more than just a bong shop. Interested in gaining legal access? Canadays can help. They're a PACE information center. You know, people advocating cannabis education. Come by the shop and check it out. Canadays. Have your say without saying a word. Canadays.ca.
But I'm still feeling well. Some Babylon thinking robbed that for my weed. One last piece of grass might have stashed up in my eyes. Policemen always come and take my lead. Policemen always come and take my lead.
So what are you doing? Nothing. Why not?
Trying to get on this Lifestyle Radio website.
Sounds like a cool website.
Yeah, it's alright. Oh, wait, I might have it.
You might have it.
You're listening to Lifestyle Radio.
The opinions expressed during this show are those of the individual participants and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of their associated organizations or Lifestyle Radio.